I'm Eric from University of Copenhagen. We work with mitigation and management of geographic sources of species in Sahel, mainly in Africa, and the problems of climate change. And it's not an easy matter, not only because the climate models are poor, but also because evolution is difficult to predict. And Professor Perry mentioned the reference to Alice in Wonderland. You have to run as fast as you can to stay in the same place. There are probably new pests and other things coming on that we don't know. Now, what I'd like to say is that, of course, we need to do something now based on the knowledge we have and the knowledge that we'll gain. So I suppose one of the challenges would be to transfer species and gene pools and so on. This was mentioned already by Lauren from biodiversity. Now, one of the problems is actually it's not so easy, not because of our poor knowledge and poor scientists, but also because it's not easy to move germplasm because of material transfer agreements. I used to work for an organization where we transferred a lot of germplasm, not for science, for the benefits of people. But now it's becoming more difficult. So this is more like a comment and a question to the policy level. It's really important that we make sure that in the face of climate change, it is possible to move species and germplasm easily. Otherwise it will be a lose-lose situation. So this is like a comment and a question of how can we address the policy level to make sure that germplasm are moved more easily than now, because the material transfer agreements unfortunately seems to be a barrier. That's at least my experience as a scientist.
Thank you. My name is Mujahid Ashuri. I'm the FAO Forestry Department. We've heard all over the days that mitigation should go hand in hand with adaptation. Unfortunately, for the last so many years, a lot of attention was on mitigation, nothing on adaptation. So now, I believe that there is a lot of work needed to reach that level, and mainly, I believe, in capacities, how to develop capacities of countries so that they can go on this. The second comment, and maybe I would like panelists to maybe elaborate on this, we've seen that 50% of the audience, they are of the view that there is a lack of appreciation among public and decision makers about adaptation. How to change this attitude? What we should do, and I believe also there is a lot of work from all partners here and from countries. Thank you.
I think also information is not just needs. We heard from Perry that it is very difficult to get models to give exact projections of what's going to be the changes, and what's going to be the impacts of those changes. So I think we really need to do much more work on that, work on local models, and working on the impact of the projected changes on different production systems. So it's not going to be something from today to tomorrow. Perry estimated that it will take at least 5 years to get that information. I think already there's so many models at the moment that a regional analysis of those models and scaling down of those models will already give reasonable estimates. To at least be able to say, well, these models in this particular area, they agree more or less on what the change is going to be, so we can be pretty sure that it's going in that direction. So I think that will help to get more concrete information, get a good estimate of what the reliability of the information is to national and local decision makers.
I think one of the issues that we have is that we don't have a common language about adaptation. When we talk about mitigation, you can see people we've got the measurement, we know what we're counting. There's pretty well-established pathways or understanding of how you would mitigate even if it's hard and even if it's costly. When we talk about adaptation, it's so wide open, and the conversation that we've had here, I think, demonstrates that. Are we talking about just the lack of capacity to countries to deal with current climate, which is poor in many cases? Are we talking about the delta? Are we talking about the change? How do we decide which of those we're doing? Are we going to measure progress? How are we going to count the costs? So I think having a lot more real thinking around that and getting some common ground among all the actors, which is why we've been investing in these different studies, not all of which people agree, but just I think all of us need to invest in the economics of adaptation, the different pathways towards it, to get some common understanding so we can have a conversation. If we as those that are in this every day can't talk to each other, how are we going to get to the policymakers that are spending a very little amount of time trying to understand this and trying to make decisions? And how are we going to explain this to the public, who in the end is going to have to be funding a lot of this, at least in the North? So common language, common understanding, critical.
I think also there's a tendency to slip into easy language, which is mitigation and adaptation should be self-supporting. But then, so what? You know, what do you mean? Give us some concrete examples of this. I think it's an easy, comforting language sometimes, so that fistifights, you know, don't break out. But I think there are relatively few concrete examples of funded projects. Maybe the board member of the Adaptation Fund can tell me I'm wrong. I hope so. Where specific goals of adaptation mitigation are met and they've been carefully thought through. However, I'm sure this will change quickly, and one reason I think it will is because in this 80s and 90s we put good monitoring systems on the ground, we are now detecting the early onset of environmental impacts, and an entire chapter in Working Group 2, which I was partly responsible for, has collected that information. So we can begin to point to places on the ground where there are real environmental trends, and there may be forest movements up the Andean hillside into the Paramos grassland, which give us actually where we're challenged. Here and now, here is something happening. So you can, I think, in those circumstances, put in place adaptation, which is concrete and it's responsive to climate change, not just some imagined futuristic impact. Do you see what I mean? At the same time, I think we need a much better picture top-down of how these two things should work together in adaptation and mitigation. I like to think of the impacts table in the IPCC, which, as you look at it here, starts at no degree warming, goes up to 5, and we plot a series of impacts that you walk into through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in water shortage you go from 500 million within 1 year, which Pachari quoted this morning, so within half a degree, to 2 billion additional people short of water with 2 degrees warming, etc., etc. Now, what's the challenge? We know we've got to come down from the right-hand side as you look at it, closing down by mitigation, trying to get from 5 down to 4, 3, 2. I said where I stand on that. You know I am not an optimist, but this is a closed session in a sense. And people don't like to be pessimistic because they feel that what won't help the negotiations. You know, we're all supposed to be optimistic. Yes, it'll work. Closing down from the right-hand side, okay? But adaptation has to push rightwards from the left-hand side, doesn't it? We need to adapt those 1 billion and then those 2 billion. And in an ideal world, we want closure in the middle. You know, that, to my mind, is what an effective combined policy is, closure in the middle. Do you think there'll be closure in the middle? The way that Bob Carell, for example, and other groups who are tracking this meeting, coming down through to 3.8 degrees, I think, when I bumped into him yesterday, as he plotted the climate outcomes of the sort of targets that have the best, he's down to 3.8 coming from right to left, right? Where are we pushing rightwards from the left-hand side there? My sense is that there will be real impacts to be borne in the middle. That's the elephant in the room that, of course, the negotiations haven't tackled. They leave the lawyers to talk about liability. And we need a big picture like that. And I don't think the leadership of the negotiations has got that big picture. How much do you need to drive from the left on adaptation? How much do you need to drive from the right? And where do you seek closure? They haven't given that point yet. You know what I mean? They haven't thought it through. And I find that quite disappointing. But I am confident that now, with the increasing amount of money on the table, with the knowledge about early onset of impacts, we wish they weren't sitting on early, but we think we can detect them, we've got real concrete challenges that we can apply adaptation to now, rather than just some hypothetical and futuristic modelling. And that's a different kind of science, because you can put management to work, can't you?